I remember the laughter first, brittle, ricocheting off the chandeliers like glass thrown against stone. My father's voice wrote it, sharp and easy. 3 piques? What for? The table rewarded him with the sound he loved. My uncle snorted. My cousin harumphed. Even my mother tucked a smile behind her teacup as if she were hiding a verdict. They assumed they were brittle and bright. They were only small. I didn't flinch. I held the silence like a thing of value, eyes steady, breath measured. Let them laugh at a dream, let them mistake stubbornness for folly. I had learned early that their amusement was never about wit, it was about power. My father taught me that. He was the man the room bent toward, the self-made titan whose voice flattened objections and whose presence rearranged the air. I was his shadow for a long time, always a step behind, learning to mimic his stride and never quite fitting the shape he preferred. When I told him I wanted physics, he laughed. When I added psychology and cybernetics, the laughter sharpened. Life's not a library, he said, the words in armor. It's a battlefield. He was right, but he defined battle by contracts and ledgers, not by equations and truth. I chose a different front. 3 years into my first PhD, I discovered the theft. My proposal, my theorem, the architecture of an algorithm I had bled over, had been pledged as collateral. My work had been repackaged into his ledger, renamed, patented to his company. When I confronted him, there was no denial, only that patronizing smile that reduced grief to a lesson. You're smart, he said, but I'm a businessman. Be grateful I gave it purpose. Gratitude was not the answer. Precision was. I finished my degrees, physics, psychology, cybernetics, each one another hinge, another lens. While he accumulated subsidiaries and glossy press releases, I built systems that saw the ruins of his commerce for what they were. I learned how his money moved, how his contracts hit other contracts, where his fingers left fingerprints in shadow accounts. I traced shell to shell, wire to wire, until what he thought was buried lay mapped in my files. I did not seek spectacle. Revenge in my hands became mathematics, patient, exact, inevitable. For 8 years I compiled timestamps and hashes, recorded provenance, built irrefutable chains of custody. My method was silence. My instrument was information. I would not shout. I would prove. The night of his legacy dinner arrived like a coin flipped. He invited me as decor, a sun for appearances, a cautionary tale polished for the crowd. The ballroom smelled of cologne and old money, cameras blinked like insects. Politicians leaned in, generals sat with carved jaws, investors laughed wherever there were profits to be reaffirmed. He moved through it like a sunbeam, warming faces and reputations. He paused at our table and did what he always did, deliver the line that set them laughing. Still studying, huh? 3 PhDs? What for? The laughter swelled, the same old music. This time I let my smile be a hinge. I had already released everything. Files that traced his patents back to my research. Ledgers that exposed shell companies and siphoned contracts. Records that tied military IP to stolen drafts and renamed proofs. Every time-stamped draft, every draft stamped by reviewers, every intermediary file that proved lineage and theft, all routed to the Department of Defense and to 3 major newsrooms with verification baked in. No rumor, no accusation, only documented, provable truth. The ballroom doors opened as if on cue. A general stepped in, uniform sharp as accusation, flanked by aides whose faces were the color of consequence. He walked the room until he stopped in front of me. The chatter thinned, glass fell silent. He extended a hand, then saluted. "Doctor," he said, one word that landed like a verdict. "Congratulations." He turned, eyes sweeping the room. "This man's work has just saved us billions and exposed a major security breach. Effective immediately, he will serve as a senior consultant to the Defense Cyber Division. Also, the company implicated will be subject to federal investigation starting tonight." The laughter died in their throats. My father's smile cracked first, then collapsed. Color leaked from his face as the machinery of exposure clicked into motion. For years he had played God in rooms like this, issuing decrees while the rest of us learned to read the ledger of his whims. Now he searched for words and found none. I leaned close so only he could hear. "Life isn't a library, Dad," I said, quiet and precise. "But it is a battlefield." I rose, returned the salute, and left the room while the murmur began. Reporters whispering into devices, investors fumbling for exits, the muffled sound of something breaking. A glass, a reputation, maybe both. A year has passed. His empire has withered under audit and indictment. Names that once headed glossy magazines now appear in legal briefs. The boardrooms that took his calls now take subpoenas instead. He calls sometimes, leaves voicemails threaded with nostalgia and apologies. I never answer. Revenge, I learned, is not the loud collapse people expect. It is surgical. It is the patient arrangement of proof until the scaffolding of arrogance becomes visible to everyone but the man who built it. When they laughed at my ambition, they thought I was wasting time. I was building evidence. When the general saluted me at that table, it wasn't vanity, it was justice executed with the same quiet exactitude I had used to learn his world. He once taught me to speak only in the language of power. I learned that language on my own terms. I spoke back with what I knew best, facts arranged until they could no longer be denied. And in the silence where their laughter had lived, I left the echo of my answer.